Thornwood Estates had stood on the bluffs overlooking the Pacific like some glossy magazine cover for decades, all manicured lawns and identical beige exteriors that screamed, "We're all equal here, as long as you follow the rules." Built in the late 1920s as a railroad baron's private playground, the whole gated community had been carved up into HOA heaven by the 2000s. The covenants were thicker than a phone book, and nobody enforced them with more fake smile glee than our beloved president, Karen Whitaker. She wore pastel polo shirts with the HOA logo embroidered like a crown, spoke in that syrupy, "I'm just protecting property values," dear voice, and somehow always knew exactly which neighbor's rose bushes were 0.2 inches too tall. I'd lived here 3 years, restored my little fixer-upper with blood, sweat, and every non-profit paycheck I could scrape together. And tomorrow was supposed to be the day Nathan and I finally said "I do" with the reception at the historic Thornwood Manor Clubhouse, the crown jewel of the community that the HOA managed. The place had been a wreck when I first moved in. Water-stained ballroom ceiling, cracked marble steps, overgrown gardens that looked like they were auditioning for a horror movie. But I'd fallen in love with it the same way I fell for Nathan, quietly, stubbornly, knowing it could be something beautiful if someone just cared enough. Now the chandeliers gleamed, the floors shone, and the bluff-side terrace was strung with soft white lights ready for our sunset ceremony. I stood in the foyer in my rehearsal dress, watching the coordinator Helena fuss over last-minute flower placements, when the double doors burst open like the gates of hell had decided to visit for brunch. There they were, the entire HOA board in full formation, Karen at the front like a general leading her pastel army. Her husband Richard, vice president and perpetual yes dear machine. Her sister-in-law Patricia, treasurer who lived for spreadsheets and shade. Uncle William, the enforcement guy who'd once find a widow for an American flag on Flag Day. Grandmother Eleanor, 83, silver cane, and the moral compass everyone pretended to respect. My younger sister on the board, Madison. Golden child married to investment banker Derek, and Derek himself. They'd shown up under the polite lie of a final walkthrough, but their faces said verdict already delivered. "We're canceling this event," Karen announced, voice dripping with that practiced concern that made my stomach twist. She clutched her binder of bylaws like it was the 10 Commandments. Effective immediately. The wedding is off. Helena, a composed woman who'd run hundreds of events here, looked from Karen to me with open confusion. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Whitaker, but I don't have any cancellation request from the bride. Emily hasn't authorized anything." Karen waved a manicured hand like she was swatting a fly. "The bride doesn't know what she's doing. She can't afford this place anyway. We all know this wedding is a fantasy that's gone on long enough." Richard stepped forward, corporate lawyer energy fully activated. "We'll need a full refund of whatever deposit was paid. I'm sure you understand that holding funds for an event that won't be taking place would be legally questionable under the HOA covenants." Patricia placed a hand on his arm, expression all fake restraint. "Let them handle this professionally." Them was the small army that had descended on the clubhouse this morning, ostensibly for a final check, but really to stage their little coup. Nathan stood beside me, gripping my hand so tight my engagement ring pressed into my skin. His parents, Susan and Michael Chun, flanked us, their faces mirroring the same bewildered horror I felt. I'd spent 2 years planning this, saving every penny from my nonprofit salary, choosing meaningful touches instead of flashy ones. And now the HOA board was treating my wedding like a delinquent account. "Mrs. Whitaker," Helena tried again, professional smile straining. "I really need to speak with Emily directly about any changes." "Emily has nothing to say." Karen cut in, turning to me with that mixture of pity and contempt I'd grown used to over the past 31 years of living in this community. "Do you, sweetheart? You can't actually afford this venue. You can't afford that dress. You certainly can't afford to marry someone without a real career." Nathan stiffened. He was a marine biologist who'd spent the last decade restoring coral reefs. Important work, even if it didn't come with a corner office or 6-figure bonuses. Susan Chin's voice went sharp. That's completely uncalled for. Is it? Karen raised a perfectly arched eyebrow. I'm simply stating facts. Emily works in nonprofit. Nathan studies fish. Between the two of them, they probably make less than Madison's monthly shoe budget. She laughed at her own joke, and the board joined in like trained seals. Madison smiled prettily. She'd always been the golden child on the board. Married at 25 to Derek, their own wedding a $2 million spectacle at the Ritz that the HOA app still gushed about. My wedding? Met with skepticism from the first invitation. The venue alone is $80,000, Richard said, addressing Helena as if I were invisible. We've checked. There's no way Emily could have afforded the deposit, let alone the full amount. Either she's committed fraud or someone else is paying. Either way, we need to sort it out now before this charade goes any further. It's not a charade, I said quietly. Every head turned. It was the first time I'd spoken since the ambush began. Oh, honey, Karen's voice dripped condescension. We know you want this to be real. We know you've dreamed of a beautiful wedding in a beautiful place, but dreams don't pay HOA dues. And frankly, after everything Nathan's family has failed to contribute, she shot a pointed look at Susan and Michael. It's time for someone to be honest with you. We did offer to contribute, Michael Chin said, voice tight with controlled anger. Multiple times. You refused. Contribute what? A few thousand. Richard laughed. This venue costs more than your house. The insult hung in the air, ugly and deliberate. Susan's face flushed red. Nathan made a low sound in his throat, half growl, half warning. That's enough. I stepped forward, placing myself between the board and Nathan's parents. You don't get to walk into my wedding venue and insult my future in-laws. Your wedding venue? Madison laughed, examining her manicure with practiced boredom. Live in reality, please. You can barely afford your mortgage here. You drive a 10-year-old Honda. Last Christmas you gave everyone homemade gifts because you couldn't afford real ones. I gave homemade gifts because I thought they were meaningful, I said. You gave homemade gifts because you're broke, Madison corrected. Just admit it. This whole thing is some elaborate delusion. Either that, or you're in debt up to your eyeballs and using the clubhouse as your personal fantasy stage. Grandmother Eleanor stepped forward with her silver cane, voice gentle in the way that somehow hurt more. Emily, dear, we're not trying to hurt you. We're trying to protect the community standards. You've always been the dreamer, head in the clouds, as your grandfather used to say. But there comes a time when dreams must give way to bylaws. And what is reality, dear? Reality is that you can't afford this life. You work for a nonprofit that pays you in warm fuzzies. You're engaged to a man who plays with fish. You've booked the Manor Clubhouse for an event that costs more than most members' annual dues. Something doesn't add up. Helena had been watching with growing discomfort. She caught my eye, silently asking if she should call security. I gave the tiniest shake of my head. Not yet. So what exactly is your plan here? I asked the board, keeping my voice level even though my pulse was hammering. You show up the day before my wedding, cancel my reception, and what? I just go home and pretend none of this happened. You come home and let us help you sort out this mess, Karen said, as if it were the most reasonable thing in the world. We'll deal with whatever debts you've accumulated. We'll help you dissolve this engagement gracefully, and then you can start over, maybe with someone more suitable. Nathan's voice was dangerously flat. You mean someone with money? I mean someone who can provide for her properly. Karen didn't even flinch. Someone from a good family. Someone who didn't grow up. And where did you grow up, Nathan? Some farming community in the Central Valley. My parents are teachers, Nathan said. They worked hard to give me opportunities. I'm proud of where I come from. Yes, well, Karen's dismissive tone said everything. Pride doesn't pay Thornwood Manor Clubhouse fees. Catherine, that's enough. Susan stepped forward, small frame rigid. You've insulted my son, my husband, and our entire family. You've tried to cancel a wedding that isn't yours to cancel. And you've done all of this based on assumptions you never bothered to verify. What's there to verify? Richard spread his hands. We know what Emily makes. We know what Nathan makes. We know what this venue costs. The math doesn't work. Maybe your math doesn't work, I said. Maybe you don't have all the numbers. Karen laughed. Oh, sweetheart, what numbers could we possibly be missing? Did you win a lottery? Find buried treasure? Rob a bank? She glanced at the board, inviting them to share the joke. Please enlighten us. Where did the money come from? Before I could answer, Helena's tablet buzzed. She glanced at it, expression shifting to something like quiet triumph. If you'll excuse me for just a moment, she said, there's a call I need to take. She stepped to the edge of the foyer but stayed close enough that we could hear. Yes, sir. Yes, they're here now. The Whitaker board. No, sir, the bride hasn't authorized anything. They're claiming yes, exactly. A longer pause. I understand completely. I'll let them know you're on your way. She ended the call and returned, professional smile now edged with anticipation. The property owner has been informed of the situation. He's asked me to convey that no cancellations or changes will be made without the explicit written consent of the bride. He's also coming down to address your concerns personally. The property owner? Richard's eyes narrowed. I thought Thornwood Manor Clubhouse was owned by the HOA Development LLC. Thornwood Estate Holdings, Helena confirmed. The managing partner prefers to be involved personally when there are disputes. Karen drew herself up. Let him come. I'm sure once he hears the situation, he'll understand that this wedding isn't going to happen. Regardless of whatever fantasy Emily has constructed, the reality is that she can't pay for any of this. Mrs. Whitaker, Helena's voice stayed carefully neutral. I'm not sure you fully understand the situation. I understand perfectly, Karen snapped. Emily has gotten in over her head, and now it's up to the adults to clean up the mess. She turned to me, expression shifting to something that might have been sympathy if it weren't soaked in judgment. It's not your fault, Emily. You've always wanted things you couldn't have. But wanting doesn't make it so. I looked at her, really looked, at the woman who had made it her mission to police every blade of grass and every dream that didn't fit the HOA mold. The woman who praised Madison's every success while dismissing mine as cute little nonprofit hobbies. The woman who had made clear that in Thornwood Estates success meant money, status, and never rocking the boat. You know what I've always wondered, Karen? I said finally. Why you never asked about my work? In 12 years at the foundation, you've never once asked what I actually do. You answer phones and plan fundraisers, she dismissed. We know what you do. I'm the executive director. I have been for 6 years. Richard waved it away. Executive director of a tiny nonprofit is still just a nonprofit. You make what? $60,000 a year? That doesn't change anything. You're right. I took a breath. It doesn't change anything. Because my salary isn't how I paid for this wedding. The question hung there, but the sound of footsteps on the grand staircase cut it off. Everyone turned. A man was descending, mid-30s, jeans and casual button-down, dark hair slightly tousled, moving with the easy confidence of someone who owned every inch of the marble under his feet. Because he did. Because this was his house. Because he was my brother. Sorry I'm late, Ethan said, reaching the bottom. I was on a call with the London office. He nodded at Helena. Thanks for the heads up. Karen had gone very pale. Ethan, what are you doing here? I live here, Karen. Or did you forget that when you were trying to cancel my sister's wedding? Ethan crossed to stand beside me, draping an arm over my shoulders like he'd done since we were kids. Ethan Lawson, the firstborn who had left home at 18 after a blowout fight with our parents and never looked back. 3 jobs through college, 3 more to fund a startup that failed, then another that exploded. By 30, he'd sold his second company for 9 figures and vanished from the public eye. The board had spent years trying to suck up to him, claim credit for raising such an entrepreneur. He'd rebuffed every attempt, but he had never stopped talking to me. I don't understand, Richard said slowly. You own Thornwood Manor Clubhouse. I bought the entire development 3 years ago, Ethan shrugged. It was falling apart, and I liked the bones. Emily helped with the restoration. She has a good eye for design, probably would have been an architect if anyone had ever encouraged her instead of finding her for every creative touch. Karen's eyes darted between us, recalculating the power dynamic like a malfunctioning spreadsheet. So you're paying for her wedding as some kind of charity? I'm paying for her wedding because she's my sister and I love her. Because she's marrying a good man who makes her happy. And because, Ethan's voice hardened, she deserves one day that isn't about you trying to make her feel small with your precious bylaws. We weren't trying to make her feel small, Patricia protested weakly. Really? Because it sounded a lot like you were calling her broke, delusional, and incapable of making her own decisions in front of her fiancé's family. Ethan turned to the chins, expression softening. Susan, Michael, I'm so sorry you had to witness that. The Whitaker board has a long history of being terrible to anyone who doesn't fit their idea of success. Ethan, that's not fair, Karen said. We were trying to protect the community and Emily. You were trying to control Emily the same way you've always tried to control everyone who lives here. Ethan's arm tightened around me. The difference is I escaped early enough to build something real. Madison became exactly what you wanted. And Emily, he looked at me with quiet pride. Emily found a way to be herself while you were too busy writing violation notices to notice. We're not disappointed, Richard insisted, though his voice had lost its conviction. We just wanted more for her. More of what? More money, more status, more misery. Ethan shook his head. She runs a nonprofit that provides housing assistance to homeless families. She's helped over 10,000 people find stable homes in the past decade. She makes $68,000 a year, and she's happier than Madison has ever been in her McMansion with her investment banker husband. Madison's face flushed. Excuse me? It's true and you know it. Ethan's tone wasn't cruel, just matter of fact. I'm not saying your life is bad, Madison. I'm saying you live by their rules, and their rules don't actually make anyone happy. They just make people rich, respectable, and miserable. The foyer had gone dead silent, except for the distant crash of waves against the bluffs. Eleanor leaned heavily on her cane, face unreadable. Karen and Richard looked like they'd been slapped. The wedding is tomorrow, Ethan continued. Emily is getting married here in this clubhouse to the man she loves. The venue is paid for. The catering, the flowers, the music, the photographer, everything is paid for. Not because Emily couldn't afford a wedding, but because I wanted to give my sister one perfect day without any of you finding a way to ruin it with your petty fines and superiority complex. You didn't tell us, Karen whispered. All these years, you didn't tell us you own this place. Because I knew exactly what would happen if I did. Ethan's voice was flat. You would have found a way to make it about you. To take credit for my success. To use my money to control Emily the same way you use your bylaws to control everyone else. I stayed away to protect myself. I stayed connected to Emily because she was the only one who ever loved me without conditions. Karen's eyes filled with tears. That's not true. I care about every resident. You care about the residents who do what you want, Ethan corrected. You tolerate the ones who don't. He took a step toward Karen. When I dropped out of law school to start my first company, you told me I was throwing my life away. When I was sleeping on a friend's couch because I couldn't make rent, you offered help, but only if I came back and took the job Richard lined up. When I finally succeeded, suddenly you wanted to parade me around the HOA meetings as your entrepreneur success story. But you never actually cared about me. You cared about what I represented. Karen started to speak, but Ethan cut her off. When's my birthday, Karen? She blinked. What? My birthday? When is it? The silence that followed was excruciating. Karen's face cycled through confusion, effort, then shame so deep it aged her 10 years in 10 seconds. March 15th, she tried. November 2nd, Ethan said quietly. I turned 35 last month. Did you call? Send a card? You have my address. I know you do because you've sent your little enforcement assistants to try to contact me at least a dozen times. Karen had no answer. Emily calls every year, Ethan continued. She sends a gift. She remembers my favorite foods, my favorite books, the name of my cat. She asks about my work because she's actually interested, not because she wants to brag about it at the next HOA potluck. She's the only person in this entire community who ever made me feel like I mattered just for who I was. I felt tears sliding down my cheeks. Nathan's arm came around me, steady and warm. So yes, Ethan said, voice hardening again, I'm paying for her wedding. I'm hosting in my clubhouse, and tomorrow I'm going to walk her down the aisle, assuming Richard doesn't want the honor after today's performance. Richard looked like he'd been struck by lightning. Of course I want to walk her down the aisle. She lives here. Then act like it. Ethan's voice left no room for argument. Tomorrow you will be here. You will be supportive. You will smile on the photos and make pleasant conversation with Nathan's family. You will not make comments about money, about careers, about who deserves what. You will treat Emily like the incredible person she is and Nathan like the man who makes her happy. Is that clear? Another silence. Then, slowly, Richard nodded. The rest of the board followed like puppets with cut strings. Good. Ethan turned to Helena. Could you show the Whitakers to the guest cottages? I think everyone needs some time to cool down before the rehearsal dinner. Of course, sir. Helena's composure had returned, though I caught the tiniest spark of satisfaction in her eyes. If you'll follow me. The board began to shuffle out, subdued and uncertain. But Eleanor paused, turning back to look at Ethan and me. I remember, she said quietly. Ethan frowned. Remember what? November 2nd. You were born during a storm. She smiled, something sad and soft. And Emily used to save her allowance to buy you birthday presents. She would show me before she wrapped them, so proud of what she'd chosen. Grandma, I started. I know we've failed you both. Eleanor came closer, leaning on her cane. I know this community values the wrong things. I've known it for years, but I was too set in my ways to change anything. She reached out and touched Ethan's cheek, then mine. But I want you to know I'm proud of you. Both of you. Not for the money or the mansion or any of that. For staying kind. For staying true to yourselves. Ethan's composure cracked just a fraction. Grandma, walk her down the aisle tomorrow, Ethan. You've earned it. She patted my cheek gently. And you, my dear, have a beautiful wedding. You deserve it. She turned and followed the others out, leaving Ethan, me, Nathan, and his parents standing in the suddenly peaceful foyer. Well, Susan Chin said finally, that was a lot. I laughed, a wet, shaky sound. I'm so sorry. I knew they could be difficult, but I never thought they'd actually try to cancel the venue the day before. Don't apologize for them, Michael said firmly. You're not responsible for their behavior. He's right. Nathan pulled me closer. You're not your HOA board, Em. You've never been. Speaking of which, Ethan straightened his shirt, composure back in place. The rehearsal dinner is in 4 hours. I've got the chef making Susan's fried rice recipe. I found it online and thought it would be a nice touch. Susan's eyes widened. You're serving my recipe at the rehearsal dinner? Family recipes from both sides. Ethan smiled. That's what this wedding is about, right? Bringing two families together. The fact that it might annoy Karen is just a bonus. Susan laughed, a genuine, delighted sound. I think I'm going to like having you as family, Ethan. Likewise. He turned to me. Now, you have a wedding to prepare for. Helena will show you to the bridal suite. I had it redone last month, and I think you're going to love it. Nathan, the groom's quarters are in the east wing. I suggest you both get some rest. What about you? I asked. I have some phone calls to make. He pulled out his phone, starting with the HOA attorney. Just in case Richard decides to make any more trouble between now and tomorrow. You think he will? No, Ethan shook his head. I think I scared him enough to behave, but preparation beats hope every time. He headed for the stairs, pausing halfway up to look back at me. Hey, Eminesia. Yeah, I meant what I said. You're the reason I stayed connected all those years. The reason I didn't just cut the whole community off and disappear. His expression softened. You saw me when no one else did. I just wanted to return the favor. Before I could respond, he was gone, disappearing up the stairs to whatever corner of this enormous property he called home. Nathan squeezed my hand. Your brother is something else. He really is. I wiped my eyes. I still can't believe he bought the whole development. He never even told me until the renovation was finished. Just called one day and said, "Hey, want to come see my new clubhouse?" Nathan kissed my forehead. "Come on, let's go see this bridal suite. I have a feeling tomorrow is going to be a very long day." The wedding was everything I had dreamed and nothing the board had expected. The ceremony took place on the bluff with the Pacific crashing below and the sunset painting the sky in orange and gold. Ethan walked me down the aisle, his arms steady under mine, and when he handed me to Nathan, I saw tears in both their eyes. The board sat in the front row, expressions complicated but behavior impeccable. Whatever Ethan had said to them in the hours between confrontation and ceremony had worked like a charm. Karen even managed a tight smile when Nathan stepped on the glass at the end, a nod to his heritage that we'd woven into the otherwise secular service. The reception filled the restored ballroom with soaring ceilings and crystal chandeliers. Susan's fried rice sat alongside Eleanor's pot roast recipe and Nathan's ant spring rolls. The toasts were heartfelt, the dancing joyous, and for one perfect night, both families came together as something approaching a single unit. Around midnight, as the party wound down and Nathan and I prepared to leave for our honeymoon, Richard found me alone in the garden. "Emily," I turned. He looked older than he had that morning, as if the day had stripped away the armor he usually wore. Richard, I corrected myself gently. "You already apologized at the rehearsal dinner. That was public. This is private." He was quiet for a moment, staring out at the moonlit ocean. "I spent so many years trying to make you into something I understood that I never bothered to understand what you already were. That was wrong, and I'm sorry. Thank you. I'm also sorry about what I said about Nathan's family. They seem like good people." "They're good people. Yes." Another pause. "Better than us, probably." I didn't argue. "Ethan said something today I can't stop thinking about." Richard turned to face me. "He said you're the only one who ever loved him without conditions. Is that really how both of you see it? That the board's love came with conditions?" I considered the question carefully. "I think your concern is real, Richard. I've never doubted that you care about the community. But caring and controlling aren't the same thing." He nodded slowly, eyes glistening. "We'll be changing some bylaws, starting with the ones that let one person decide who deserves happiness." The next morning, the neighborhood app was unusually quiet. No new violation notices. No passive-aggressive posts about certain events. Just a single pinned announcement from Karen. "Congratulations to Emily and Nathan on their beautiful wedding. Thornwood Estates wishes them every happiness." It was the closest thing to an apology the HOA would ever post, and I smiled reading it. Years later, when people asked how we pulled off the wedding of the century in the strictest HOA in California, I always gave the same answer. I didn't. My brother did, quietly, patiently, the same way I had waited through years of fines and side-eye and just protecting property values lectures. He reminded everyone that real community isn't built on rules. It's built on seeing people for who they are, not what they can afford. And every time I drive past the clubhouse now, still gleaming, still hosting weddings for residents who don't fit the old mold, I think about that day the Karen who thought she owned everything learned she didn't own a single soul. The satisfaction never gets old, because sometimes the sweetest revenge isn't loud. It's letting the people who tried to cancel your dreams watch you live them anyway, right under the chandeliers they once tried to turn off. And that, my friends, is how you win an HOA war without firing a single violation notice.